so exciting. Rajiv, thank you for making this happen, because this is just really exciting for me personally, but I know for a lot of people who are really looking forward to hear about Liliya's excellent, fascinating, really interesting journey. So thank you for both of you working things around and making this work out for Procurement League and taking us forward. So Liliya, I'm going to quickly introduce you in the best way that I know, and then I'm going to let you add to that. Sounds good?
Sounds good.
On this Thursday with Procurement League, welcoming Liliya Rechitsky. Rechitsky, is that right? Rechitsky?
Rechitsky. Yes, Rechitsky. But it's very close.
Rechitsky. I knew Rechitsky, but I saw the SKY and I went for the Y. I don't know why. Okay, Liliya Rechitsky, she's the Senior Director of Procurement for Best Buy as of right now. And she's just had the most extensively amazing journey in the space of procurement. So I'm going to let you add some more roundedness to this introduction. I'm sure a lot of our people who are here would love to hear that. And then I'll get into the questions.
Yeah, absolutely. So first of all, thank you for having me. It's really a pleasure to be here. Thank you, Rajiv. Thank you, Devangana, for just, having this chat. Before I kind of get into a little bit more of an introduction, I have to say that I'm really passionate about this space. And that's partially why I wanted to speak to the Procurement League members today, because it's such a wonderful space. It's so full of opportunity still. And at this point in my career, part of what's really important for me is really to give back to the procurement professionals, by sharing the experience that I have gained over time. So thank you for having me. Yes, as you mentioned, I'm currently Senior Director of Procurement with Best Buy. For those of you who may not know, Best Buy is the largest retailer of consumer electronics based out of the US, but also, of course, ships globally as well. So I'm based in Chicago. Prior to coming to Best Buy, I worked for McDonald's for about 5.5 years. Before that, I worked for Kraft Heinz for close to 3 years. And I spent the beginnings of my career with Walgreens. Most of it has been within strategic sourcing indirect area. In Chicago, I live with my husband, Mike, and my 3 boys. So between my career and the kids, things are never dull for me. So thank you for having me.
Amazing. That sounds good. And your sons look lively, like they keep you active and you keep them active. So that's exciting. All right. So Liliya, I always ask everyone this question, and I keep asking Rajiv this question every few weeks. How do you define procurement? Like what from your lens is procurement?
Yeah, that's a wonderful question. And I always think about things that if it's me spending my own money, what do I have to do to spend it effectively? So obviously I have to understand what I need, right? I have to understand what's a fair price for whatever I need. I need to make sure that whatever I get, it works for me, that I can get the expected value, that I get it on time, and that over time, I actually want more out of it. I want kind of this value, right? I just, I need to make sure that I'm getting, I basically, if I spend my own money, I have to understand so much about what I buy. So when I translate it into the business world, the world of procurement, to me, it's the same. If you're in the procurement, it's really not about just buying something, right, and making it delivered. Your responsibility is to make sure that you're buying something for the right price, at the right quality, that you get it when you need it, that you are that you know what's going to happen to it during its life. So what kind of is it going to be serviced? Is it going to be how can I get more out of my suppliers, because now this is kind of this ongoing relationship. So to me, procurement is doing the actual tactical procurement, but it's also being very mindful of developing category strategies, because that's what I need to do in order to know if I'm buying something for the right price. It's being very skilled at negotiations and doing negotiation fairly, but also in such a way that it's works for both parties. And then a big part of procurement for me is also supplier relationship management. I can't see how you can really decouple the two, because in order for me to keep buying at the right price and get it at the right time and get the most value, I have to have the right supplier relationship management in place with my key partners. So.
Right. So tell me, how do you know, Liliya, like you spend a lot of time in this space. How do you know this is the right deal? This is the right, this is the right thing to procure. This like how do you know what goes into really feeling that sense of surety that this is it?
Absolutely. To me, it comes back, you have to really do your research. So you have to understand what is that's needed. Very often when procurement gets a request, we don't always understand what's actually needed. So we may have a very high level request of this is what's needed. And then when you dig in, you understand that actually something slightly different is needed. So for me, it's understanding the business need, not really the specs so much, but the business need, and also doing the work to understand what's happening within a given space, within a given business need, within the market. What is, who are the players in the market? What is the fair price? How do people, how does it come and go within the market? What are the challenges? So you have to understand kind of both of those components. And when you have that in place, you really have to develop what my needs commercially and then business-wise, and compare that to the offering. And if there's a mismatch, you know that it's not, something is off, right? When there's a match, you know that this is a good deal. You've done your research, you know what the market is, and you know that this is what you need. But if you haven't done that research, it's very difficult to actually have an answer to that. How do you know? Because you really don't.
What's your appetite for risk taking in the space of procurement? I mean, there is sometimes a lot of research and experience and background that somebody might get, but there might be somebody who's novel and new to the space. Like what is your risk appetite when you think about procurement?
I think it all comes back to the value proposition. If my value proposition is higher from taking a risk and moving faster, and my risk is low, is not very high, then or at least the value is higher than the risk I'm taking, then the risk is worth taking. I don't think in procurement we have to approach every possible deal as a cookie cutter. It truly is, how do I extract the most value? So I'm a big proponent from moving fast and not getting into a place where we're like robotic in what we do, right? But really understanding what's important to the deal, what is possible value, and if the value is higher from moving faster, then you move faster. You don't take risks that you're unaware of, so you have to at least acknowledge what the risk is. But once you've acknowledged it, it's a conscious decision of whether it's worth it or not.
Interesting. So Liliya, what was really fascinating to me was that you actually started your career in the IT sector and then moved on to the supply chain procurement side of things. What led to that pivot? What did you take from the IT sector that you brought to the supply and procurement space? It's just fascinating. And I mean, somebody from an outside lens, I can see that, but I think your internal learnings would be very different than what somebody would externally think it to be. So what was that? What was your journey?
Yeah, it's kind of, some of the things initially, happened to me, right? So I didn't plan for them. But when I look back, I'm very happy, for the way things worked out, because I feel like I'm really exactly where I'm meant to be. But my undergrad degree was in information systems. So I was fully expecting that I would graduate and I would become a programmer. Now, I wasn't exactly sure what that meant, to be a programmer. I had an idea of, how to code and the fact that things get coded, but, that was about the extent of it. But that was my plan. And my junior year of college, I got an internship in IT, and I was doing quality assurance of new software packages before they hit production in the retail space, and things were going well. Now, this was right at the just on the cusp of coming out of Y2K. And for those of you who don't know what Y2K was, some of you may be younger than that, but really, when the year was switching from 1999 to 2000, there was a lot of concern that all of the programs would be broken because they were coded with a 2-digit year, and now the programs would get confused. So there were, I would say, armies, literally armies of programmers who were hired just to rewrite these programs. And but then 2000 year happened, the programs were rewritten, and there was just a huge influx of programmers and not enough jobs. So that was, a little bit of a bummer because at my graduation date was 2002. So I was just about to graduate and I was looking for a job in programming. But then 9/11 happened as well. And on top of that, the economy took a downturn, and there were no jobs, period. So no jobs in IT, even few, and no jobs in general, really, really bad job market. So I remember at the time I actually graduated, I continued in my internship, which was still in the IT space. And I was looking for a full-time job and going to interview for really any job. I was looking for jobs which didn't require a degree of any kind, and I was not getting them, kind of, hitting a little bit of a brick wall. But, and then my manager's manager in my internship called me and he said, I really just don't have a job. I think they kept me on for extended period of time, hoping they would have something for me. But he said, I don't have on the horizon any jobs for you in IT. But he did introduce me to somebody in supply chain of the same company. And I'm very grateful for that because it's always about, and this is what I learned, it doesn't have to be anything big, but it's a good word that somebody might be willing to put in for you that might make a difference, because that's what he did for me. He put in a good word for me at the supply chain position. I wasn't exactly qualified on paper. I didn't have any kind of experience to get it, but his good word for my and vouching for me ended up getting me that position in supply chain. And so that was kind of my pivot from IT, but that role in supply chain was an interesting role because it was acting as a liaison between the business, which happened to have been procurement, and IT. And so my knowledge of IT was very useful to that role. And, but it also, I was able to translate to IT and I was learning about procurement. And so that was a really good experience. I learned enough about procurement to eventually get the next job in procurement, and then the next one and the next one. And I stayed in procurement ever since.
Interesting. Tell me, Liliya,
Devangana, can I ask a question?
Yeah, go for it.
Follow-up question, actually, just on that thought. So first of all, Liliya, I think I really appreciate the humility with which, you explained this background about yourself. And, for someone to really come and say that, hey, in the starting time frame of my career, I was kind of looking for any full-time job because of the external market environment. So it's a lot of humility in what you just said. What do you think, how procurement professionals can actually leverage this human attribute of, being humble, being, vulnerable in some situations, and actually create win-win propositions? Because generally speaking, procurement is a very powerful position because everybody is trying to sell into you. So kind of there is a sense of that power once you are a senior executive in procurement. So how would, I see in your answer such humility. How do you think, people can actually embrace that humility as an attribute and really make it work for their advantage in procurement?
That's a great question. I think about, what is it that we do, as procurement professionals, what is it that we actually do? And I think the answer is, yes, we're trying to get certain products and services for our companies, and we're trying to make sure that we fill a need and actually just getting them there. And of course, we're trying to optimize the budgets of our companies. But outside of that, to me, it's all about how do we maximize value for our companies for companies mainly, right? You know, I mean, I wouldn't go as far as to say, how do we optimize value for our suppliers? But I think that to optimize value for our companies, we do have to take it a step further and really explore areas that we don't know. And I think you have to have humility for that, to admit that there's a lot that you don't know before you get into whatever it is that you have to get. So every day, I learn something new. I ask a lot of questions from my internal stakeholders. I try to spend time with my suppliers to understand what do they know that I maybe don't know. So I ask a lot of those questions. So before, I think the benefit of that is that when you do that, when you ask a lot of questions, when you approach your work with that position that you don't know everything and that you're willing to learn, when you have those conversations, that's where great insights come out. And that's when you in procurement can apply those insights to really drive greater value than you would have otherwise.
So well said, Liliya, so well said. I think, the whole aspect of, kind of assuming that vulnerability and asking questions, going in with the position that, I don't really know everything about this particular category or about this particular deal, does, do bring those kind of insights, which will ultimately lead to the best value. So great insight. Thanks for answering that question. I'll let Devangana continue with her line of thought.
Yeah, so Rajiv, that's like, just to piggyback on your question, Rajiv, Liliya, you spent a lot of time in two very interesting spaces, which is IT and then sourcing and procurement. And now like the whole world ever since 2020 has been living a technological life. What do you see, like, from both of these lenses? What do you see to be the future of procurement? But keeping in mind the IT side of things, right? Like there's just so much technological living that we're living in these days. How do you see the future of procurement? What's going to change? What will stay?
Yeah. I mean, that's such a good question. Before I answer the question directly, the fact that I know and understand IT, and the fact that I know and understand the business world has benefited me so much, because I have that understanding. But to be honest with you, what I found is that many people don't have both of those skills. So I think it's imperative, no matter where you are, whether in your procurement or you're in any other business function, you have to make yourself at least somewhat knowledgeable in IT. You have to understand the basics. You have to understand the language, the implication. As we all know, everything is going digital. And in the future, there's no decoupling business from IT. It's really merging. And to be a successful business professional, you have to understand IT. So it's the benefit. I felt it because as I have progressed through my career, I've had, for about 10 years of my career, I was really in charge of buying technology for companies. So I was doing technology sourcing. And the reason I was successful is because I could understand better than I would have otherwise the needs of my technology stakeholders, because I spoke their language and I could buy that technology more effectively. But now looking into procurement and technology within procurement, as a procurement professional, regardless of what technology you use, you will have to start to understand IT and digital in general. It will show up in all of our contracts, how we're connected to what we're buying digitally is going to show up and play a bigger role. We all know about the risks associated with information security. Of course, data and the value of data is becoming larger and larger, and it is imperative that we understand the implications of that, because that's where the most of the value will be. So if we don't understand it, we cannot extract the right value. And then I'm also passionate in terms of digitalizing procurement overall. So I think it's still a long journey for most procurement organizations. I know we aim to digitalize and be I guess, as technically enabled as, maybe some of the other business functions. I know we will get there, maybe a little bit later after some of the others, but huge opportunity there. So right now, actually, something that I'm really working on is to have a fully digitalized procurement function. Not there yet, but it will happen. And once you take that first step, like anything else, it's a continuous improvement, but it becomes more and more digitalized and kind of just the way we do work.
And I think that's a great point, Liliya, because I will tell you that that I work with a lot of procurement executives like yourselves, and I was talking to recently the North America procurement operations leader for one of the largest pharma companies in the world. And they have been implementing a source-to-pay technology for the last 2 years. The project is kind of overrun by almost a year. So lots of cost overruns, time overruns, and they are struggling with the adoption. So I think the point that you mentioned, that one of the key skill set that procurement leaders should look for or try to, inculcate in their team members about, just being a little bit more digitally native in trying to, just understand the basic concepts of things like UX, things like, how systems work and all that. No one needs to really get down to coding and all that, but the very basic understanding, I think, is such critical, because I will tell you that when I was talking to this executive and I was responding to one of their RFPs as a supplier, I could right away identify issues with the UX, just being a seller. And I know because of those issues, there would be, similar sellers and supplier providers who would not be, using that system that often. And if you don't have your suppliers using the system that often, you can't really just complete the transaction. So, your adoption will go down. So your sellers are going to go away. And since your sellers are going to go away, your buyers are going to go away. Mm-hmm. So, you kind of come back to the same problem. So the point that you mentioned, that I think, very, very important skill set for procurement executives, younger professionals entering the field, and, leaders like yourselves to, look at these, these team members to have that skill set, a basic understanding and appreciation of, how digital processes work, how basic technologies work, what's a UX, what's a material design, and all that kind of concepts. I think going to be really, really critical, not just procurement and all that, So while procurement and negotiation can come, I think this is going to be a very, very key skill set for people to have. So it's a great point there. Great point.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And I guess just to maybe add on to that, when it comes to source-to-pay implementation, so you talked in general about adaptability, adoption of any solution. Exactly. One of the big challenges is that you might have the best-in-class source-to-pay solution, but there's still a lot of challenges within the organizations to make sure that those are actually adapted. And that is something that right now we're thinking of very carefully. How do we make sure that whatever we implement is adapted? And there's this barrier to overcome because people still feel more comfortable doing things via email. To your point, Rajiv, they're not digitally native. So until you get over that hump, doing things via email and Excel and Word is still more comfortable, right? It feels like it's faster. So finding ways to overcome it, whether it's through, probably it's obviously, it's communication, but it's also training, right? How do we make sure that people are trained where the other way becomes easier?
And you're right. It's a journey. It's not going to happen right away. I've spent 25 years in procurement. So these things didn't come naturally to me. I've spent last 3-4 years, made a conscious effort to understand basic concepts of, design, UX, user behavior and all these things. So it takes time. So you're right, but if we acknowledge it and we start making an effort in that direction, it's going to happen next few years. So I think this is really the key pivotal point for a lot of procurement organizations, because everybody is trying to get onto this digital bandwagon in some way or the other. But if we don't build these basic building blocks, then, few years down the line, companies would still be struggling with the low adoption and all this. I think this is just the right time. So you're absolutely right. I think, we just need to start taking baby steps in those directions, and they're not going to kind of come overnight, because, doesn't come naturally to us in procurement. We are kind of, people who do the deals. So, to really look at the process, to look at, workflow, user journeys, these are terms that, don't naturally come to us, but we need to do that.
Exactly. It feels like initially it feels like a distraction, right? From doing the Yeah.
Sounds good. I'm glad. Yeah, I'm glad to hear that perspective.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Devangana,
Okay.
sorry.
No. That was a great discussion. So just to kind of pivot a little bit from here, but actually like talk about something very serious while we're talking about the technological life that's going on. How did 9/11, Liliya, impact your career? So I'm actually going to kind of couple a few questions together. So one was 9/11. The second is, did the 2009 market crash affect your career in any way? And what do you foresee? Like, I'm always looking at every time there's a high, like I start thinking about what's going to be the next fall. What do you predict is going to be how the next few 5-7 years technologically are going to be? So let's start with 9/11, go to the 2009 market crash. How did that impact, if at all? And what do you foresee is going to be the rise and fall of the procurement technological world?
Yeah. So 9/11, I would say was kind of like a nail in the coffin of my being a programmer, So I would say prior to 9/11, if I was still hoping that maybe there will be a job in IT for me. And again, coming out of college, and that's what you study for, you're really hoping you're going to get that good programmer job, right? So like I said, post Y2K, the job market is already not very hopeful for in IT. And then 9/11 happens and forget it. There's no chance. So it just kind of solidified that for me. So that happened. And then my journey, kind of started. I did go to get an MBA shortly, almost immediately after getting an undergraduate. And of course, MBA is all business focused. So, and my concentration, I had a concentration in entrepreneurship. So I always had this kind of business spirit in general. So I do think that it ended up being better suited for my skill set and my personality to kind of make that pivot into business in general. What I found by the time 2009 came and there was the market crash, by then I was well established in my procurement career. I was sourcing IT, and I have found it back then, and I still feel it now. If you are a successful procurement professional, you are going to be more in demand for your skill set when the market crashes. That's the time when companies are looking to save. When things are going really well, you will encounter times when you come and you say, we can save, we can do things better, we can optimize value. But business is doing so well that people may say, I don't really care, I just want to grow. When the business is down, it's the opposite. Everybody wants to save. So in 2009, the company where I was at that time was looking to save. We had all kinds of cost-cutting initiatives. We were busier than ever. We are starting to experience that now as well, with the market taking a downturn. So I think that's a good thing for all procurement professionals to realize that if you are good, you will be having recruiters call you and pull on you during downward times. And I think this will, as we look into the future, I think it's only going to gain, in importance and prominence because supply chains are continuing to get so much more complicated. It does feel like we've had a little bit of a pullback like with the global supply chains. People are rethinking how all of that works. There's just in a way, it's a little bit of a pullback because companies are rethinking their global supply chain strategies. But I actually think it's all of the things we've been talking about and thinking of in terms of how do we structure supply chains that allow us to manage risk better, allow us to capitalize on what different companies know and bring to the table better. It will kind of continue to gain in importance. So when it comes to procurement, I think procurement organizations in general, if there are still any functions that are tactical and maybe really look at themselves as a tactical procurement function, that will change because they will have to start developing strategies and figuring out how to do supplier relationship management, how to have at least an opinion on how to manage risk and how to manage supplier innovation. So I think we will get more trained as procurement professionals and more important within our organizations.
And if I may add to that perspective, Liliya, I think I always believe, having spent a couple of years in procurement, that procurement remains the window of an organization into the outside world, and for the outside world, it becomes a window into an organization about what's happening in the organization. So I think to your point of when the markets are down, procurement people will be in demand, and I think the same logic applies that even when there is an inflationary world now, procurement people are more in demand because, when the supply chain folks or the production folks or, research and development folks, when they can't really negotiate with the suppliers, to get the products or the services in time, guess who they're calling into? They're basically calling the procurement people that, hey guys, can you help us, negotiate with these suppliers? Can I get, these things earlier? Because, I'm getting a lead time of like a year. Now, they don't really know. They don't know how to deal with these conversations because they are not trained into doing it. It's basically procurement's job. They know what are the right levers to pull. What is the right conversation they can have with the supplier to say that, hey guys, from this 1 year lead time, I need to get this thing in like next quarter because I need to introduce this new product or whatever. So I think, nowadays, even more procurement people are in demand because of what is going on around the world in terms of supply chain and risk and everything else, right? Low cost country sourcing strategies are shifting. People are thinking make versus buy for every decision. Like 10 years back, it was something different, but I think countries and bigger corporations are now taking a more holistic view that what should be our make versus buy strategy, or even if we were to really make, where should we make? Or if we were to buy, where should we buy from? So there's a lot of these very important conversations, especially for these large corporations, as well as smaller corporations who do not really have this skill set. So I think, your point, like, there was never a profession like procurement. And, trust me, I'm 25 years in this profession. I still feel like a kid. Every day I feel so excited and passionate about this job that I cannot really even tell. And I think that goes on into our team that who's very excited, like Devangana and Shahina and everybody. They're so excited to talk to leaders like yourselves and everybody else. Day after day.
Yeah.
So Liliya, I have a follow-up question for you. Rajiv has been in the space for 25 years, and Liliya, you've been here for really long, and I'm sure many people have been here for very long, right? When any field, any industry starts off, 20 years ago, all of us didn't live very, visible lives. Our lives, I'm sure like Rajiv's life in the space of procurement, your life, when you just started off in IT, was not that technologically visible on, every portal, every website, everywhere. But now, because we have to sell and compete all of our ideas in the space of procurement, what we're doing, what we're not doing, what are the pivots we're making as a company, what are our strategic moves, everything has become very visible. How do we protect our edge in the procurement world as procurement professional in this very competitive, like what would be your advice to somebody who's excellent at procurement to remain excellent but still keep that competitive edge while making it visible? Like how would a Rajiv 20 years ago, if he was here today on LinkedIn, how would he protect his procurement edge when everyone is competing with him?
Yeah. I don't know if this is, I guess we all have like different views, right? And something like this. What I'm learning is that in our procurement world, there's so much demand for our skill sets, and there's so much opportunity out there that it's more to our advantage to lean in and learn from each other and help each other and really elevate each other than it is to kind of, be protective of our own, some kind of unique value offering. I'm a firm believer that if you know something, if you have done your work, if you have accomplished something, it's yours. Nobody's going to take it away. Some people may not agree with you. Some people may prefer something else, but it doesn't change the fact that you have some expertise that is of value. And I found that if you actually lean in and take advantage of this visibility, the fact that you can now connect to other procurement professionals much easier. If you lean in and you make those connections, you will come out significantly stronger as a result of that. So I've been in this space close to 25 years, just under that amount, but Rajiv and I have been kind of in this space for almost the same amount of time. And back when I was starting, everything that I was doing, it felt like it was a new problem that I was figuring out on my own, every little thing. And to be honest with you, I didn't even think that, probably this is not the case. Yes, I work for a large company, but there are other large companies who have procurement organizations, and they may be dealing with the same thing. It just really didn't occur to me. So every problem seemed that much more difficult. Fast forward to now, yes, there's still problems that you have to figure out on your own, but there's so much information out there. You don't have to do all of it on your own. So leaning in and really partnering, I think just adds to the strength.
Okay, that's good advice for a lot of young folks in procurement here. So Liliya, just building on that, what are some big challenges that you've faced through your career, especially like being a woman in the space of IT, in the space of procurement, just starting off, losing your job, not being in an industry where there were no jobs, starting off in the space of procurement. What are some of the biggest challenges that you've faced?
Yeah, well, I think going back to my career, earlier in my career, I think many of us are called on doing large negotiations. And in these large negotiations, you're dealing with powerful people, internally powerful and senior people, and externally, you're dealing with their highest level executives, often much of the time. So being a woman and being young, in my career, to be taken seriously, you have to know everything at 200%. So of course it takes time. You have to really, if you come in in that situation and you show that you don't know, you will just confirm somebody's initial assumption that you don't know what you're talking about. Therefore, you are not, you shouldn't be at the negotiation table. So that was probably one of the challenges, because it takes, you have to work that much harder to overcome that and really to prove yourself that, yes, you do know what you're talking about. I think it's, that it has to do both with being younger, being a female in that kind of environment. Of course, none of us can know everything all the time. So I think, some of it, that challenge you overcome with time. Eventually you get to a point in your career where you don't have to know everything, and nobody does anyway, right? But you can give yourself a little bit of space to not, ask more questions, and not feel like that looks bad on you. And we've talked about asking questions at the beginning, but at the end, that's really how you learn anyway. So I think that's one of the challenges. But the other challenge is there are times that I've encountered in my career where doing the right thing didn't matter. So most of the time in my career, if you did a really good job, you did the right thing, you were working with people who also want to do the right thing. So you may have disagreements, but it's a healthy dynamic. There are times when there are hidden agendas and there are people who actually don't want to do the right thing. And I have encountered that a couple of times. And I've encountered really a power imbalance when whoever is, kind of has more power than you and actually doesn't want to do the right thing. It becomes a very difficult situation. I think in that case, it was less having to do with me being a woman. It's just a personality. Sometimes, my male peers were struggling just as much as I did. Sometimes there's very little you can do, unfortunately. So in those situations, I had to change what I was doing. I had to, maybe switch my jobs, the companies. But I think it's a good reminder for me how precious it is to protect the fact that we don't create cultures which allow for power imbalance to thrive, and how to try and have culture where everybody actually can come and have the same voice and be heard, and when doing the right thing is what rules.
Interesting. So it's interesting because I speak to so many men in different industries who made it become very successful, and they feel like at the end of the day it's the output that matters. Doing like wrong things here and there, they don't think too much about it. But as women, I think we're just born in ways where, this nurturing side where we're like, we have to do the right thing, we have to work hard, we have to give everything to make and see success. So it's interesting how gender plays out. Rajiv.
And I think, this with Devangana and Lily, I think, to give a little bit of insight into so I'm a very woman-oriented home, like, wife and 2 daughters. So, clearly I think, and I had 2 sisters. So, it has definitely shaped my perspective about, participation of women in the business world. And I've seen in the last 25 years, to your point, Liliya, like, going back 15, 20 years ago, it was very difficult to find, female leaders in some of those, positions of power, and especially in the procurement supply chain space. Thankfully, my career has been influenced and shaped greatly by a lot of wonderful women procurement and supply chain leaders that I've worked with, who have mentored me. So a number of my mentors, and I've been a mentee to them, have been women leaders in procurement. So I've really seen very, very closely the impact they make. And consequently, just a data point, from our perspective, Liliya, running my businesses, I have made sure that, we have between 2 of our businesses, Procurement League and Buying Simplified, I can proudly say that, 3 out of the 4 leadership positions, team leadership positions that we have are actually, held by women. That's a very conscious effort that, I'm making in my businesses, because I realize the value and the impact that, this inclusion and diversity can actually make into the business. So I really, really am committed to growing our business, and wherever I have a voice, wherever I can share, I really support this idea that, we need to make a conscious effort towards increasing inclusion, increasing diversity, especially in the procurement supply chain space.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. It is about conscious effort, because I think, if you don't, until you really think about and analyze the situation, I think it's easy to take things for granted, right?
Exactly.
You might not feel that there is, any kind of power imbalance, or you may not think really about some of the circumstances that lead people, women specifically right now, to reach those higher level positions. So I think it is about conscious effort. And I would be remiss if I didn't talk about pressures of being a mom with young kids, and still attempting to have a leadership position. The combination of balancing both in cultures that don't support really, mothers, right? But really caretakers of any kind is extremely difficult. And I think that's where we see a lot of women still drop out. I can personally vouch for that. I worked for an employer when my kids were a little bit younger. This is still the case because my youngest is 4, and my older ones are not all that old. But even the oldest ones were a little bit younger, and there are little things, such as, for example, you cannot be at your desk at 8 a.m. because you have to drop them off at daycare, and they throw tantrums. And I worked for a company at the time who was extremely understanding of that, even though I was treated as a little bit of an exception. Fast forward to now, and then you wonder, if the bus doesn't come until 8:15, How can you be at your desk? But it's a little thing. It ultimately doesn't make a difference in anybody's performance. But if you don't make those little accommodations for young mothers and you put that stress, it becomes so stressful that I think that's why we see women drop out and we just don't have the pipeline that is rich enough.
Exactly. And that's like one of the millionth things that you just said, Liliya, being a mom, that those are running through your mind. And for any, working mom, that the kids have to get ready. I mean, they have to have their lunch packed, they have to have their phone. I mean, something that's my wife, the first thing that she does when she gets up is to put the phone in charging. So the kids, they want the phone, but they won't charge the phone. So the first thing she would do is, go into the room and put the phone in charging. So these are those little things that, it's just innate nature. It comes naturally to moms, that's the way it is. And I think if businesses can understand the potential that a working mom can really juggle so many things and how to harness that for business effectiveness, that I think that's going to be the tipping point. So I think, you're right. Conscious effort has to be made, but a lot more has to be done. I don't think, especially, in the Western world and, especially US, I mean, we all know there are all kinds of studies and statistics out there. I think we need to keep pushing the envelope. And I'm glad that, there are some companies doing it. And I saw some of the posts about Best Buy and some of the other companies, they're really, really making an effort in terms of, improving inclusion, improving equity, improving working, balances for working moms. So great job there.
Yeah. And I think talking about it, even a little bit here and there, even what we're doing now is important because it highlights something that maybe is worth highlighting, an extra time.
Exactly. So thanks for bringing that up, sharing your experiences there.
Yeah. I almost forgot about my one biggest challenge, right, of being a woman in the workplace,
Okay, so Liliya, I'm sure lots of people are going to love this question, but you know what, when I was going through your career graph, what I saw was that you've taken some really big risks. Actually, you worked with some very big risk companies, that have created a lot of controversy and news and all of that. Like you worked with McDonald's, you've worked at the scale at which Walgreens works. It's so massive, the scale at which it works. How do you manage procurement in these large companies where there's constantly, some risk, some big crisis that could occur at any time? How did you work through it? Tell us more about your life working with some of these big companies.
Yeah. I mean, I think what's important to know is that, when you work for a big company, sometimes it's even harder to actually prove out why your internal stakeholders have to come to procurement. And what I found is that in every one of these big companies, procurement is so incredibly busy. They're busy with transactions. They're busy with deals. There's never, there's just so much to do all the time. But at the same time, when you look at it and you analyze the spend and you realize how much spend actually doesn't go through procurement. So you have this, kind of ironic situation. Procurement is so busy, but so much spend is actually not touched by procurement at all. So one of the things that I look at every time I kind of take on a new category, maybe, switch organizations is, what don't I know? What doesn't my, let's look at what procurement does handle, but what does procurement not handle at all? And to me, that's usually has been eye-opening because it's more important to know what you don't handle and where you're not present to be able to identify, are you actually even working on the right things? So, and really switching that perspective from being reactive, which is kind of a lot of procurement organizations fall into, to being proactive. I've never worked for a small company, so my experience has always been in these large corporations, and I see that kind of see the situation repeat itself from one company to the next. So I think, when it comes to managing and understanding the risk and really making sure that you are at the right place at the right time and adding that value is to understand what you don't know, understand what you're not managing today, and then start to build proactive strategies for how to work on those bigger things, and figure out at the same time in parallel, how do you free up time for yourself so that you're not so busy, right, with all of the transactional and smaller things. So that has been my approach, always, a work in progress. The other thing is, sometimes I actually did encounter situations. So I'll go back on what I said, when procurement is just not so busy, and it's not a ton going on. It's slower time, and kind of my answer to that is that there's no such thing as not busy in procurement. If you are not busy, your stakeholders are buying without you. You're just not there. So.
Yeah. How do you managing teams? Rajiv is an excellent people manager, but how do you manage to keep your team busy and, constantly working to make sure that they don't get off the hook? Because this is such a high-paced, high-intensity job. Managing teams can be very hard for the manager and for the people. So talk a little more about that.
I kind of going back to my conversation about my initial statement about having a lot of conversations, whether it's with internal stakeholders or internal suppliers. I think people management requires a lot of that too. A lot of time brainstorming with my direct reports on what is happening, what is most priority, what challenges are we encountering. Maybe it's the fact that we have identified an opportunity, but our stakeholders won't acknowledge it. They don't have time for it. Maybe it's the fact that we think there is an opportunity, but we can't ever get to it because we're so busy with transactions. So my approach is to have a lot of those conversations, a lot of coaching, a lot of talking about the why, with the hope of inspiring my people to go after that higher value on their own, because I can't be everywhere at one time. Nobody can tell people do this, this, and this. It's got to come from internal vision and drive.
Amazing. Does anyone have anything to add at this point? Rajiv, go for it.
Oh, no, I don't want to steal thunder. So everyone, of course, I always have such an interesting conversation, but, anyone, if you would like to kind of, ask or add, please feel free to unmute and share your perspectives. There's always that moment when we ask the questions, and there is, that's okay. We can give people some time, so we can continue on that. Yeah.
Okay, awesome. Yeah. No, Liliya, Rajiv, I've managed some big teams, and I feel like hiring the right people and setting them in the why are two such great ways of keeping them working constantly. And I think that's just good to feel like it's reiterated constantly. So Liliya, coming to around the last question, if you had to give someone advice who's getting into procurement today, how would they build their career? You know how you and Rajiv build your career in the space of procurement is very different from how a Shahina would build her career, or Avneet would build his career in the space of procurement from now up until 2040. So what would be some advice that you would give to them?
I think, first advice is, as you get into your procurement job, don't set your sights so much on the next step. I see a lot of young people get into a job and almost immediately worry about that next step. And they haven't had a chance to roll up their sleeves. They haven't had a chance to actually learn yet, but they want to move on to the next step. Sometimes it's successful, but it actually robs you of the opportunity to build up those skills that are actually needed in that next step. So don't be afraid to roll up your sleeves and become, I'm going to put it in quotes, right? And become kind of an expert in something, become an expert, really understand what you're buying. When you do that, you're building up some of those most critical skills that are really critical for the future in any jobs. You're learning how to negotiate, you're doing research, you are collaborating with people, just so, you're obviously time management, but you're building up skills that you can take with you anywhere. And that's how you build up your reputation. At that point, people come to you because they want you in that higher level job because they have proven that you can do this. So I think that would be my kind of biggest advice. Don't move on so fast that your resume looks great on paper, but there's not a lot of substance to it.
That sounds really good, Liliya, because you're right. I mean, I think it's just perhaps also a function of the opportunities that sometimes, being young can also lead to that level of impatience in terms of, getting to the next higher title or getting to the next higher salary range. So it can be very tempting. It can be very tempting. So, to avoid that temptation, to create that engagement, the point that you were earlier making in terms of understanding the why, I think is really the key. When people really believe in the mission, in why they're doing what they're doing, I think that really is what creates a longer term engagement with the job. And that leads to value for the person itself, that, basically you learn and you can become expert in doing something.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think, the other thing is procurement is a really good place to be because it does help you build out all of those skills. It gives you really broad exposure to the business, almost every function you're exposed to. It gives you, like I said, those negotiation skills are priceless. The fact that you're learning how to collaborate internally and externally, you're getting exposed to so much within the business world, which you may not get exposed to within another business function. So yes, become an expert, but also before you move on out of procurement, really do compare the skills that one job will help you build versus the other. I'm convinced that procurement is one of those places where it's going to help you build more skills than many of the other jobs in the business.
I couldn't agree more. They're very well said. Yeah, absolutely.
That's really inspiring and exciting for many of us on this call because it just makes us want to stay in this space. So thank you for reinforcing and re-energizing that.
Yeah, guys, thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure chatting. It's just really nice, to have a platform to talk to other procurement professionals. So thank you for that. Rajiv, it's great to see you in this forum again. We'll definitely be in touch. And I look forward to other opportunities like this.
Thanks a lot. Thank you again for taking up the time.
Yeah. Thank you, guys. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.